Well, it's great to be here, and thank you, Archbishop Mark, for setting the scene. This session will probably be a little different in the sense that it'll be more process-focused. I will be giving a few little things I've learned in my life, but I'll be also inviting you to share your experiences with one another at the table. So, as Archbishop Mark said, listening is going to be a very important skill as we learn to become missionary disciples together. I love that phrase of Pope Francis's, being missionary disciples. And how do we do that together? And as you are aware, the Plenary Council of 2020 is on the horizon, and Pope Francis is committed to this kind of church, the synodal church. And he says to us, a synodal church is a church that listens, which realises that listening is more than simply hearing. Now, so often we're listening to somebody and we're thinking about how can we tell our story? Where will I jump in here? That's not my thoughts. But he's saying it's listening is something more. It's a mutual listening in which everyone has something new to learn. The faithful people, and I love that he starts there, the College of Bishops, the Bishop of Rome, all listening to each other and all listening to the Holy Spirit, the Spirit of truth, in order to know what the Spirit is saying to the churches. And I think Archbishop Mark gave us a couple of wonderful examples there this morning. His own experience of being in Rome for the Synod of the Family, and I too, like him, it has been such a big journey listening to the survivors of sexual abuse. And I have learnt so much, and I've also learnt how to be with someone and not to have to say anything. And I guess we see this kind of listening alive in the Council of Jerusalem, and that story is told back in the Acts of the Apostles. And remember that story? Paul and Barnabas come to the council and say, look, there's a big problem. We've got all these people who believe in Jesus, they want to follow his way, but you're saying they've got to be circumcised. And they have this conversation. They share their experiences. And what happens? The council is able to make a shift. And they decide, no, the Gentiles don't need to be circumcised to be Christians. And not only that, at the end of the council they said, we will send 2 members from this council with you as you share this news with the community. This is the kind of church I think we're being called to be, and I call it the middle space. It's the in-between. It's the Holy Saturday space. We don't know where it's leading us, but we know it's of the Spirit. I think our Indigenous brothers and sisters have something to teach us here as well. And there's this lovely reflection, or the word dadiri, which means inner, deep listening and quiet, still awareness. Something that what we speak comes from the inner place. We listen from the inner place. And it's interesting that Archbishop spoke about the rule of Benedict, and we have that lovely saying, don't we, of Benedict, Listen with the ears of your heart. That's challenging. It's a process of deep and respectful listening to build community. And that's what we're on about today. It's been part of our community life as we gather in small groups. And particularly I reflect that the nature of the Lenten programs in this archdiocese has changed over time. If you're engaged in the Lenten programs, you probably notice that they are a lot more reflective. For me, I guess this understanding came when I first began with school boards. And we had a visit from a Benedictine, interestingly, Sister Mary Bennett McKenney, and she came here and she shared her shared wisdom model. And I know that that model has been in the Parish Pastoral Council handbooks. That wonderful piece of wisdom, whenever 2 or 3 come together, I'm with you, and the Spirit will always be with you. And the key principles, everyone is given a piece of the wisdom. Everyone. No one has all the wisdom. I think that's what Pope Francis is saying. Different people bring different pieces of the wisdom to the group. And our responsibility is to share that piece of wisdom. Now, just a little experience from my own life. When I began in leadership in 2014, congregational leadership, one of the things that was on the agenda was to look at the future of our incorporated ministries. And we had a board formation day, and I probably had a vision about where I thought it might be going to need to go. And we had an afternoon panel. And at the panel, one person brought a piece of wisdom to the discussion, which was, we have too many boards here, we have a whole lot of little ministries, perhaps we need to be doing more things together. What's going to give life to all these wonderful works? What will give them the best opportunity? And it changed the whole direction of where we were heading. Now that journey has taken us 4 years to come to where we are today. So I'm just going to invite you now. You listened this morning, and just in twos, because I think there are 6 at most tables, you might share what's one piece of wisdom that you heard, and see if you can really listen to the other. So, what was a piece of wisdom you heard in the first session today that you want to hold on to? So just take a moment's silence to get in touch with that. You don't need to go back over your notes. Something's probably stayed with you. What was that like for you? Mary Bennett McKenney says, to share wisdom effectively, each person in the group is called to share their wisdom. So did each person have an opportunity to share? Did you think that you were listened to with respect? Was it valued what you had to say? Were you taken into something that you hadn't thought about or reflected? And I guess it was quite interesting to note that people heard different things. And why is that? Because we all bring our own story, don't we? We all bring our own experience. We all bring our own engagement. And so something in that talk this morning probably touched you, and something else touched someone else. So here's just a few little reflections about what's it like to do some good listening. doesn't want to go. Sorry. So good listening requires patience. Am I truly able to listen to another, or am I simply waiting to get my chance to speak? Now, I know myself, often I'm listening to get my point in, you know? I'm not really listening to the person or the story or the wisdom or the experience of that person. Have you ever found yourself turning off? Saying, oh no, here they are again. Good listening requires attentiveness and patience. To really listen to another is really an act of love. Being truly present to another, believing that that person is the beat of the sacred. And it empowers and it values the other person. When you're not listened to, what happens? Often you can feel diminished, can't you? It also asks, It also asks us to ask questions, perceptive questions, not just questions to, get a little bit more detail, but a good listening often takes the conversation deeper. What do you mean by that? Can you help me to understand a little more? I wonder if that happens in your parish pastoral council or your pastoral teams. I heard you saying this. Can you help me to understand it? It's actually ministry. Good listening is ministry. It's actually being willing to listen with compassion, to be truly present to another. Have you ever had that experience of someone listening to you and you really felt they were with you? They were listening, they were nodding, they were umming, yeah. And it took you somewhere. I often find that on retreats. I get taken to places. Someone listens and I get taken to places I had no idea I was going to go to. And it also reflects our relationship with God. So if I keep filling my life up with chatter, I'm probably doing that with God as well. And I think one of the really important things about listening for the future is going to be having these pauses of silence, tuning down, going down a little. What's happening for me as I listen? And if I listen well, then my response will come from a different place. So if I'm going to share something, my response will come from a different place. So we're just going to take another little moment, a reflective pause, and reflect on a time when someone gave you the gift of listening, when you experienced the gift of listening from another. Just to concentrate on that for a moment. When's a time when you felt really listened to? And then just shift into your parish experience. When has good listening brought about a positive outcome for you and for your parish community? Can you think of a time when that happened? And here's an opportunity. Just focus on this, particularly the second part there. Can you think of an experience in your parish community where good listening brought about a positive outcome? So have a conversation at your table. I wonder if there might be 2 or 3 people who, in your listening, have heard an experience where good listening has brought about a positive outcome in a parish. So we've got 2 or 3 brave people who might be willing to share. It could be something you heard, you listened to at your table. It doesn't have to be your own story. So what I'm hearing as you share those stories, and I know there are a lot more of those stories in this room, is I feel empowered. I feel empowered by your sharings, and others feel empowered by it as well. And that's true. I was just, when someone reflected, putting up, and you acted, you got into the action. I've been on committees where we've gathered all this information and we've delivered it to where we had to deliver it, and it's probably ended up on the shelf, gathering dust, or maybe even in the rubbish bin. So what does that do to you? It actually diminishes you, doesn't it? So good listening uplifts, empowers, and not good listening diminishes and takes away your energy. So important that, we actually can listen to the heart of another. So what I was hearing were some of these things that I wanted to share with you. Giving the gift of listening. Giving the gift of listening starts with you setting aside for the moment your agenda to be sourced in a conversation with another. Now, how many times have you been to a meeting today? People arrive with their mobile phone. They put the mobile phone on the table in front of you. They may have it turned to silent, but you know that they're waiting. Or have you noticed even at morning tea? People, as soon as the break comes, people are out running on their mobile phone.
See if they won the lotto.
See if they won the lotto. Now, there are times when you do need to do that. You may have someone sick in hospital and you need to be attentive to it. I'm not saying yay or nay about it. I'm just saying, to be mindful of, is this me not really giving myself to this experience? And we're in a different world, and I'm still learning this world of technology and how it impacts. Giving the gift of listening invites listening with your body, your heart, and your intuition. So, sometimes somebody leans forward. Somebody holds your eyes. But if somebody goes back like this, or pushes their chair back, do you want to keep telling your story? Probably not. Giving the gift of listening requires one to be aware of the filters we bring with us. That can be any kind of a filter, So it can be the filter, I'm going to that meeting tonight and I know so-and-so is going to be there and she drives me mad. And, or this person is from this culture and I find it really hard to listen to that kind of a culture. Now, we had a little experience of this the other day ourselves. We're actually trying to discern around a ministry that we have that's held within a certain property, and we're engaging with different groups around it. And one of the things for me naturally was to one group that wanted to converse with us. I don't really want to be conversing with that group. And you know what? When we heard them, I was excited about it. Now, we haven't finished that yet, but it just shows if you can leave your filters at the door, good things can happen. It also requires us to use appropriate questions, and I think I said that, questions for clarification or that take the conversation deeper. And good listening honours another person. And I just thought a good example of this is the Syrophoenician woman, isn't it? Does it want to come? Look at the question. Look at it's an experience for both Jesus and the Syrophoenician woman. The Syrophoenician woman comes with a story. Jesus and the apostles come with a filter. The filter is, I've come just for the lost sheep of Israel. She says to Jesus, "Can you cure my daughter?" Now listen to Jesus' response. "I didn't come for you." Now at that stage, the person could have got completely diminished and left. But the need in her was so strong that she came back with another response. And in that response, it shifts Jesus' thinking. Can you see that? He cures her. He says, "Go home, your faith is great." So asking the right question, leaving behind our filters, gives the space for growth and transformation to happen. That's what our hope for this church that we are in the middle space, in the chaos. It's about, can it take us to the place of transformation? Now I just want to say a little bit about how might we grow in our capacity as leaders to listen. And it requires two things: being attentive to the other and being attentive to the voice of God in it. So at the practical level, and you do this in your workplaces, this is not just a church thing, but you might set some ground rules, or perhaps you might want to call it a covenant. If a person in the group, for example, is speaking, no one should interrupt. Now, of course, that gets tricky when you get somebody who can't stop, doesn't it? How do you bring that to a conclusion? How do you say, well, your story is really, really important, but we are time bound, aren't we, as well? At our meetings, we will turn our mobile phones to silence and perhaps put them in a place that won't distract the whole group. We all commit ourselves to bringing our piece of the wisdom. You might have a detail that nobody else has thought about, and you can sit on it. And your parish may be the poorer for it. I'm sorry. I'll just come back to that. Listening to God. Listening to the voice of God in the midst of all of this. What's the invitation? Well, I think the scriptures again give us some clues, don't they? We have Mary, the Annunciation was spoken about this morning. Mary listens to the voice of God through the questions. How can this be? We get the same in Jeremiah. I'm too young. I can't do this. In Joseph, we get Joseph hearing the voice of God in his dreams, in the dreams for our parish. In Elijah, we get people hearing the voice of God through the gift of nature. Have you ever been somewhere where you're thinking about something and the penny drops and, you got the insight. I don't know, do any of you look at Death in Paradise on Saturday night? It's a bit like the detective, isn't it? You know, he gets this, it's sort of here, and then somebody says something and he gets a hunch and and it's the clue. Myself, I sort of know when my stomach churning, or do I feel like I can go and have a banquet? That's always a good indicator for me. So many people today, I've got those there, sorry, are talking about contemplative dialogue. Now, many of you are into centering prayer and Lectio Divino and all those things that you do. So does this mean I just go away and sit in a quiet corner? Well, look at what comes afterwards. It's contemplative dialogue. It's a way of engaging in a meaningful conversation that is rooted in deep listening. And I think the Archbishop this morning spoke about that. For me, a wonderful example of that was how the religious women leaders of America, when they had to engage with the Vatican through an investigation, how they dialogued around the issue. And I remember meeting one of those sisters, and she said, before we went to meet with the Council for the Doctrine of Faith, we sat together in silence in contemplative prayer. And the outcome was quite different, and I think it was a wonderful example of that. I think Mary MacKillop's another example of that. Someone who was at odds but never put people down at times and was able to see through, go to another space, go through to that. So what does it look like? Well, these are some of the things it looks like. We listen deeply for the emergence of fresh wisdom, and we heard that in those stories. We risk being changed by the perspective of the other. It's a way of holding and being willing to be there in paradox with others. Others whom you might necessarily agree with. And it's listening, it's about honouring the person. Now, I'm just going to skip a little, and these are all lovely. That's a lovely thing, a reflection from Joan Chittiser. She says, in the Benedictine tradition, they have this value of hospitality, and they invite guests into their place. And she said, reflecting on it, it says, thank God that someone has come to stretch our minds and our souls. So every time someone new comes into your parish or a new member becomes part of your team, thank God. They're going to stretch your mind and your soul. Thank God someone's come to shake us from our complacency, the little voice of the Filipino. Someone has come to prod us beyond ourselves. So good listening does that. So I can go. Sorry. So I just want to walk you through this little simple process, because in a moment we're going to engage in a conversation at your table, and my people could go around and do that while I do this. This is something I've found helpful when I've been working with groups. Firstly, to find someone in the group who will be the holder of the group. Now, often this would be your chairperson of your parish pastoral council. It may be a team member, But you need to have somebody who's going to make sure that everyone has an opportunity to be heard. Then for you to consider the topic, and on your table you'll find a little scenario. And just before you begin a conversation about it, find your own place. Take a little bit of silence. What response do I want to make? This is what you do when you prepare to get ready for a meeting, isn't it? You're getting your thoughts and reflections together. And what's guiding your response? That's the first thing. So take a little bit of silence. And then when you're ready, the holder of the group or the coordinator, the leader, whatever you want to call them, invites people to start to share their reflection or their insight. And what I'm asked to do is to listen. Not to listen to think about, well, how am I going to respond to that person? It's about listening and seeing what's going on inside me as I listen. You may want to ask something for clarity to help you to understand more, but don't get into that discussion till everybody's had a chance to respond. Because often that happens, isn't it? One person makes a comment, everybody in the group then responds to that person, and then somebody else's piece of wisdom has never come to the table. So give everyone the opportunity to speak first before we get into clarifying and discussing. In some groups, I'm not suggesting we do this today, but some people have something like a message stick or a candle just to help people to stay focused. Now, this initial response to the scenario is not a dissertation. It's not a PhD thesis. It's just your own personal response. And then when you've listened to everyone, what did I hear the group saying about this reality? Now, in the bigger scene, you might want to add you might need some other wisdom. You know, you might need some wisdom from the tradition of the church. You might need some wisdom from the scriptures. You might need some wisdom, from a book you've read or something. We won't do that today because, we're just going to respond to that. And then to see, what do you think was the invitation of God to you as you discuss this scenario? So now I'm going to invite you. There's a scenario on your table, but firstly, decide who's going to be the holder of the group. Take some silence to see how am I going to respond to this challenge. And then when you've done that, the holder of the group may invite people to share their piece of the wisdom. You don't have to go around the table one by one. And always, in good listening, somebody today may not be feeling very well. They might have a sick relative. They always have a freedom to say, today I don't have a response to that. Okay, you always need to give people that kind of freedom. It's not that they're not interested, it's just the circumstances of their life. So off you go. Okay. Now I know you haven't finished, and I'm not going to find out, did you resolve the scenario? Because the exercise is more about how did we go in the process? How did we go at this simple form of contemplative dialogue? So, did we take a moment to actually sit with how you were going to respond to the topic? Did every person have an opportunity to share a piece of wisdom? Did I notice what was happening in myself as I listened to others? Did you have a sense of where the group was? Now, I know you didn't finish all the conversation, but did you have a sense of where the group was? And maybe some of you got to a place of, what was your sense of God's invitation? So what we want to hear from you, from your table, is how was the experience? What did you learn? Were you able to stay with it? Or did you go off on another topic? What was the experience? What was the learning for you? What didn't work for you? So you might like to have a little conversation about that. And then we'll get some feedback from each of you, each table, all right? How was the experience? What am I learning? Okay. And just another little reflection. Looking at these 4 principles which are essential to this experience of contemplative dialogue, did you feel honoured and valued by the members of the group? Where did you hear the emergence of the new? Was there any fresh wisdom that someone offered? When did you risk being changed by the perspective of another? Did any of that happen in your group? And were there moments of difference? And how did you manage those? So have a little natter about that, and then we'll get some feedback. So, did you feel honoured? Was there any fresh wisdom? Were you changed by the perspective of another? How did you manage the differences? Thank you for that, and thank you for the learnings that you have shared with one another. I do realise, of course, a scenario, it's sometimes much more difficult when you're faced with the reality that it's your little community. But one of the comments made was it was not the end result. It wasn't the solution that mattered. It was the process of how you got there. And I think that's going to be really, really important as we engage with the Plenary Council. It's not so much about the outcome. The outcomes will be important, but I think it's going to be around what happens on the journey to that final time that will be important. And can we do that in a way where we can hear or be present with others? And that was really what I was hoping to bring out of today. Would have loved to have heard how you resolved all your scenarios, but that's fine. Just to say, in your folder, if you haven't already discovered it, there is a couple of pages, and that little process is on the back of that. I will leave my PowerPoint and script to go on the point. So thank you. It's been lovely to connect. Wonderful to hear the wisdom in the room, and so lovely to hear that it's been an experience where there's been mutual listening and sharing and empowering of each other. So thank you.